Hello, welcome to Backyard Pet Talk with Shannon Riley. I'm Shannon Riley, and today we have Dr. Meghan Herron, a veterinary behaviorist, that's going to talk about shelter dogs and her new book that's coming out. I'm very excited to have Dr. Herron here. I got to see her in Minnesota at a behavior conference, and I was so mesmerized and just loved what she was talking about that I wanted to share the information with more people because I think she has some important things going on that can help shelter dogs. And she has this great book coming out. So I've been very excited to have this podcast. So welcome. How are you today?
Thank you, Shannon. Really happy and honored to have the invitation and great to, meet you in Minnesota. It was a great venue, great event, our veterinary behavior symposium, and love to plug that. We have it every year, a different venue, so you get to travel somewhere new.
Exactly. And I loved this year's, our little plug for this for sure is I love the format this year where we talked about all the new research one day and then had tips and things the next. I thought that was the best. I've gone to the symposium a few other times, not a ton, partly because sometimes I go, God, I just want to travel for one day if I don't attach it to another conference. And so I really thought it was a valuable, probably one of the most valuable conferences I've gone to in a really long time. So I was really enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah. So it's Louisville June 2025. We're hoping to have an even better event. Again, day of research and then a day of just practical behavior. So I'm excited.
I know. And I loved it because it was such a broad variety. I mean, there were technicians and trainers like me, and there were behaviorists, and there were so many general vets that went that I thought was pretty great too. So, well, I have so many things to talk to you about. I'm very excited. So can you first, because some of people in our audience may not, be aware of who you are or things. So can you tell us about yourself and how you became a veterinary behaviorist?
Sure thing. I'll try to keep it in the under 2 minutes. Brevity is sometimes not my skill set, but I'll do my best. I mean, the short of it is I was really into animal behavior. That was kind of what really pinged my interest. And during my undergraduate studies, which at the time was kind of lost in not knowing what I wanted to do other than science, I liked it. And it was, really I had a problem behavior dog that I think all of us behaviorists have that animal, whether it's a dog, a cat, a horse, a bird, right? That
for sure
it just opens your eyes. This whole what was the dog? You ask new residents, what was the dog or cat or horse that did it to you? I'm sure Shannon has one as well.
For sure, my flat coat retriever. I had a flat coat who was dog reactive. My first dog when I was out of my parents' home, it was in '96, and she was attacking other dogs, and I was trying to go with these old aversive trainings. And then in '99 I became a vet tech, and I went to Western and saw Karen Overall. Karen Overall changed my whole world, and she said aggression doesn't treat aggression, and I was like, what? And never turned back. And Sadie was a difficult dog for her whole 12 years of her life, but she taught me so much. So yeah, so you had that dog too?
Yeah, he was an 8-week-old puppy that bit me within the first 5 minutes of having him. So, and I did the same thing. I went to a trainer and told me he was so dominant over me and all these aversive things I had to do. And I was really committed to fixing the problem, and it got so much worse. When I went to the Ohio State University for my veterinary school, and we didn't have veterinary behavior at the time. So I was kind of at a loss, but was fortunate enough to be connected with an applied animal behaviorist, Tracy Schreier, who was really just giving a lot of her time to teach students and seeing some cases so they would get some experience. And that was my eye opener, where she's like, actually, your dog's not dominating you in the slightest. Like here's what fear and conflict and emotions mean. And isn't it crazy how the light bulb goes off and then you realize behavior is just so much common sense, right? And not this crazy religion and madness that it's played out to be. And the lay resources are on television. It's like, oh, the burner's hot, don't touch it.
Right.
Yeah. Fire doesn't put out fire. Oh yeah. So.
Right. I know it sometimes, like in my book, Evolution of Dog Training, I have this chapter on the myths, and I put in just some of the basic things, but it was like, you don't have to walk your dog. Like if your dog doesn't like a walk, there's no law book saying, but it's so much of these things that are entrenched in our mindsets because of past and then when you learn it, it's hard to wrap your brain around some of those old myths and all these stories that people tell about dogs or animals in general, because all animals get the stories, you know. I mean, horses, poor horses are still, you know, get a lot of, you
Yeah.
know, like there was just recently a thing went around Facebook of this poor horse's spine that was fused together, terrible arthritis. She was euthanized because of behavior issues, because she wouldn't let riders stay on her. She kicked when they groomed her, you know, and they were, and then they see that this poor horse was in pain for God knows how many years, but she got blamed for being aggressive. And it's like, well, I would be aggressive if you were trying to jump on my back and I had arthritis in it. I love what we do, but it is sometimes a struggle because we fight up against that
There's always
old beliefs. Yeah.
and then there's always a new trend perpetuating old myths as though it's a novel idea. And yeah, you know, it'll probably never go away, but it keeps us on our toes, I guess.
Right. I always say behavior is simple but not easy. You know, yeah, it really is. So you went through puppy and how did that go?
And then, you know, I went to, you know, I go, why don't we have behavior here? And I remember going to our dean at the time, and I said, I want to do this dual degree and I want to get a degree in behavior. And he said, oh, you're funny. We don't have that here. We're never going to have that here unless somebody endows a position. But yeah, better like here, there, pat. And I don't take to that well. I don't do no. No mean to me is just try harder. I also decided to pursue it on my own and had similar experience. So I actually, for the Association of Pet Dog Trainers, the APDT annual conference, had a scholarship for vet students. You just write an essay. And so I wrote an essay about my dog and I won, and I had to miss like the second week of vet school for the very beginning, the first year.
Oh my gosh.
Which you're not really allowed to do. But I was like, well, you don't have my good career path here. I'm going to I really want to look at this. And so I went and I met R.K. Anderson. So you had Karen Overall change your life. R.K. Anderson changed my life. And he said,
he was amazing.
I just happened to sit next to him. Such a kind man, and you know,
sweetest man ever.
You know, what we kind of consider the grandfather of veterinary behavior. You know, Kathy Haupt is our grandmother, and you know, just these founding people that really started something, and that we maybe don't even, those of us now don't even realize, like we wouldn't be here if it were not for them. And so he just said, oh, you're interested in that. Well, you don't have that at Ohio State, but you know, here's the places that do have it. You should go to Davis and UPenn and Georgia, go check them out, get to know people. And here, I'll give you all their contact information. So I did, like the next day, just started emailing everybody saying, hey, this is who I am. Can I come hang out with you in your service? And they're like, sure, why not? And so every summer I was spending time at different veterinary behavior academic institutions, getting to know people, and then also figuring out, because there weren't a lot of residency options at the time. And so kind of figuring out who would have a residency available when I was ready for one after graduating and spending a year in practice. And so kind of connected, and then ended up with the residency at University of Pennsylvania and had the honor of studying under Dr. Alana Reisner. Interestingly, I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to go Colorado, California, somewhere, like I'm this young hip person, I'm going to start this exciting life somewhere. And literally had like resumes ready to go to these referral hospitals. And my cousin, Dr. Linda Lord, was actually at Ohio State at the time in the preventive medicine department, and said, you know, if we wanted to do behavior at Ohio State, in theory, you know, what would you think would entail, and who do you think would be a good person? Because she knew like how to get me. Like she knew I can't just ask her or tell her. I have to dangle a carrot and let her think someone else is going to do it. And it's like, you can't have someone else in my alma mater. Wait, what? And she's like, all right, well, just write a budget, write a proposal just to see, you know. And so that was a challenge. And so I did. And Dr. Rustin Moore, who's now the dean, was a department chair at the time. And he said, we'll give you a chance. If you can make it pay for itself in a year, maybe we'll keep you. I mean, it was nicer than that, but it was kind of like, we'll give it a try, but it's got to be revenue neutral. Like we can't lose money on this.
Totally.
And so again, another challenge for me. And so again, within a year, we had a 3-month wait. And so it became very popular. I think there was a little bit of pushback at first, like, why do we need that? Because again, it wasn't in most of the curriculums. So the faculty members there weren't really as familiar with it, even though I'm sure they dealt with it on a daily basis with handling their patients, managing them, or getting compliance with their treatments, because the animals couldn't tolerate them or weren't being acclimated to them appropriately. So that was sort of my path to veterinary behavior at Ohio State, and starting that clinic there, which was it's pretty amazing to start something from the ground up.
That is beautiful.
Great.
That's one. And it's funny because you say, I was teaching puppy class right after I graduated from vet tech school, and I got the scholarship for vet techs for APDT as well. And
Yay! Look
yeah,
at
so
backgrounds. That's fun.
I don't remember if that was like 2001, I think. And I took the first APDT, the CPDT test, because I was like, well, I got a free scholarship here. But of course it was right after 9/11. So half the conference wasn't even there. And it is amazing the way we find our way here, to where we're going. So then you got into shelter dogs. So you started this Ohio State, which was awesome. How did you get into shelter dogs?
So, I mean, really that started in vet school. So I actually, was offered a position at our local county shelter in Columbus during vet school, like for a summer sort of program. And I just happened to be going to UC Davis for a 5-week externship. And so I met up with Sheila Sagerson, who now everybody knows with Maddie's Fun, veterinary behaviorist. And she was one of the first people to do a shelter medicine residency, but she specialized in behavior because at the time you had to either pick internal medicine or behavior as a shelter medicine specialty. And so I just like buddied up with her. I followed her around like a little puppy dog and just tried to learn as much as I could because she's amazing, smart, really innovative ideas with sheltering and behavior. And then I took that information back to my county shelter and helped with their programming. And then when I did my year of clinical work between vet school and residency, I got a sort of a 20-hour-a-week position with the county shelter, just trying to help behavior programming. And it was really sort of, hey, we'll pay you for 20 hours and just do behavior. Just do stuff. And there's so much fodder in a shelter. It's like, where do you begin? Right. And so, we started a hotline for people with behavior problems. We started kind of a Head Start, basic skills and manners. I had the pleasure of following Kelly Gorman when I was out in California. And so I tried to do some open paw things there. I was a little naive and thinking all these things I could accomplish, but some of them, I learned a lot. I learned so much and also learned out what the need is and how behavior, it's everything in shelter medicine. And so then carried that into residency with some work with some of the Philadelphia shelters. So it's always been a part of what I've done. Okay, so fast forward to my time at the university, I was introduced to a couple named George and Tina Skestos, who are the founders of GiGi's. And, they've been connected with, our local community society, Columbus Humane, with at the time their director, Rachel Finney, had some really great ideas. And they had the passion to say, we don't just want to build a shelter, but we want to have an impact on shelter dogs' lives. And so they created our shelter organization, GiGi's, and wanted to know everything about behavior. How does behavior work? And what can we do to be the best? Like, we want to help these dogs be as comfortable as possible. And so, at the time, George was 90 years old and he was sitting in the front row of all of my introduction to animal behavior courses with the vet students, taking notes. And if he couldn't make it, he sent his assistant to take notes for him. So it was pretty great. And then so I helped them, what color do we want on the wall? What type of lighting? What kind of kennel?
Even to that detail.
Very, again, to have the opportunity again to be in some things at inception was pretty fortunate that way. And then they kind of, as they're building, say, well, we also want to help behavior dogs. Well, so GiGi's current system, the goal is to do as much as we can to improve the life of shelter dogs, but mainly our focus is on the rural dogs of Southern Ohio. So the Appalachian areas that are heavily impoverished, very low resources, so in Ohio, every county has to have a dog shelter, but there's no mandate on how much money the government has to give them. And so they maybe have 1 or 2 employees. There are a lot of homeless dogs, but not a lot of homes looking to adopt. And so we have this surplus of dogs there. So the idea was to bring them out of those areas into more metropolitan area where there are higher adoption rates. And not just doing, because everybody's doing transport right now, but GiGi's is also providing vaccines and wellness care, providing education to their staff. One by one, we're trying to rebuild their shelters to prevent infectious disease and provide better welfare for the dogs under their care. And then we move as many dogs out of those shelters as possible into our brick and mortar shelter. So we are a organization that works without shelters throughout the state of Ohio, but we do also have a brick and mortar shelter, and we do adopt dogs out directly ourselves. But we also partner with some dogs in other higher volume metropolitan areas if they have high adoption rates, whatever's the fastest path to a home for the dogs that we care for. I said, so if you want to put dogs with, behavior challenges in your shelter, they have a longer length of stay. They require more people to care for. They require people with a slightly higher skill set. It's going to cost you more. And so you really need to look at something sort of complementary so that you can move as many dogs, save as many lives as possible in an efficient manner, and also help those that may have some challenges. They said, okay, cool, we built it. Can you work for us?
Well, tell us a little bit, because some people might not even know what GiGi's is. You and I know what GiGi's is, but what is, just a little brief description of what is GiGi's? I mean, I know that's partly why I was so excited when I heard you talk about it, but what is a little bit about GiGi's in case somebody's not sure what that is?
I mean, our motto is improving the lives of shelter dogs. And so, but specifically, we are looking to help dogs that are homeless, dogs that are in unfortunate circumstances, not because it's necessarily their fault, but for socioeconomic reasons, their location is such that they don't have access to veterinary care. They don't have access to doctors in a lot of situations. And so there's really not a lot of opportunities locally. And so we're looking at ways to support the local shelters by providing, again, prevention, vaccines, education, and then moving those dogs out of that impoverished area so that we can provide them access to veterinary care, behavioral support, and adoptions. And so originally that's how we started. So as kind of an organization that supports dogs and shelters in Southern Ohio, also helps find the fastest pathway to homes for those dogs. And then we've really expanded even further. So we have a state-of-the-art parvo treatment center. So we are one of the shelters. I mean, we used to say crazy enough to treat parvo, but now that we're doing it, we hit a lot of bumps on the road. We're doing it and it's efficient. It's about, having the staff for it and making sure all your protocols are ready for this. But now we not only treat if parvo is to break in our shelter, which it sometimes does, because a lot of the dogs coming to us have never had vaccines. And now we will not just so if a puppy breaks with parvo, one of our partners in Southern Ohio, we'll bring them right up and get them treated. We'll treat any in our shelter that happened to break with parvo. And now we've been so successful, we have the capacity to treat other puppies. So now we've opened it up to really any 50c3 institutions or organizations that have a puppy with parvo in their care, that we can treat them at a very low cost. We lose money on that part, but it still fulfills our mission, right? So we have the endowment from George and Tina Skestos to really fund our operations, which is very generous of them. And it was their big idea and hearts to really not just have a shelter, but to impact the lives of shelter dogs all around. And behavior is in every aspect of this. Right. So
I was just going to say that is so great. Now, I mean, there's so many, we could probably talk for hours, but I want to not get too crazy, but tell us, how are some ways you've helped these shelters dog that have behavior issues cope in the shelter? Because shelters are so stressful for so many dogs, that the noise, the isolation, the smells, the lack of that human companionship, especially when these shelters that are just overrun. There's too many dogs, not enough people, not enough resources. What are some ways that you have helped these dogs cope in the shelters? Obviously we're not gonna be able to do every single thing, because that would be like a 5-day, conversation, but some of the top things that
the highlights.
Yeah, if a shelter was listening and they're like, oh, we could implement some of these things in our shelter.
It's a struggle, and especially right now, because adoptions are slowing and lengths of stays for dogs are growing. If you look at the national statistics, length of stays for dogs, particularly adult dogs, they're getting longer. And we are a palace of a shelter. It's, if you ever get the chance, if you're ever out this way, come see us. It's beautiful. It was, our founders are builders. And so it's beautiful, tons of natural life. Again, all planned from the stress mitigating standpoint of how can we make this as most comfortable for the dogs as possible. But it's still a shelter. It's not a home. And we've got to help them, particularly if they're facing several weeks length of stay before they find that forever home. Because even a dog that comes to us normal without any problems, they'll have problems if we're not careful. Most of what we're doing is prevention and salvaging and preventing things from either breaking or getting worse. So I'd say one of our top things we try to do, particularly for our younger dogs or energetic dogs, if we have time, we'd love to do it for all of our dogs. And it really just, if it's the right fit, is we do what I call the inverted triangle of activity. You've heard me speak on this before, and it's kind of a silly name that I made up in residency because I don't have a better way to describe that. But when you see kind of our plans for the day and all of our dog names, you'll see little triangles, upside down triangles next to them. And basically that means we need to provide their physical, their mental and their social stimulation needs kind of in a predictable manner, and making sure we're hitting all three of those. Because yes, all dogs do need some form of physical exercise, but some dogs don't do well with a long walk. And there's some dogs that you walk them and then you put them back in their kennel and they're almost worse than they were before you walked them, because they got overstimulated, or they thought this is just the start to my day and now it's suddenly ending only a few minutes later. And so we start with the big part of the triangle, which is move your muscles in whatever way that works best for that dog. So if it's a walk, if it's a fetch, if it's just you're in isolation, so I have to toss the treat back and forth, so you move your muscles. We get that part done first, because that tends to be the most arousing, exciting, and gets them all jazzed up. So we get that over with. And then the next step is our mental stimulation. And so we try to work their brains in a way that works for them, and all depends on their attention span. And that part doesn't have to be very long, a couple of minutes, maybe 30 seconds for some dogs that are having difficulty focus. And maybe it's practice some learned skills you have, sit down. We usually don't teach high five or shake, because then they start to paw at us. But the point is that they're using their brain and they're learning something new, or rehearsing behaviors that we think might be polite. So it's a double in that, if you already know these polite behaviors, you're going to be more appealing in one of our adoption meet and greets. And that mental stimulation that follows the physical stimulation just helps bring them down to a little bit calmer of a state. And then the last part of that is the social stimulation, because a lot of these dogs, as you mentioned, they're just really longing for that connection. They need that social. They're domestic dogs, right? We, over thousands of years, selected them to like people and want a social interaction. Now, granted, you may have a shy or fearful dog that doesn't necessarily want to be hugged or cuddled, but just working on, being present with them or providing that social connection, so that they're not begging for it by using inappropriate behaviors or undesirable behaviors like pawing or barking or mounting or mouthing or jumping on us. And that might be sitting in kennel with them. That might be in a separate room. Maybe you're just doing notes while they sit next to you on the couch, or catching up on Slack, or reading a book, to just give them that one-on-one time. And so you can see the pattern is going from big activity to little mental stimulation to one-on-one social quiet time. For dogs who like massage or petting, that is a nice way to kind of bring them to that state of calm. So by the time it's ready to go back to kennel, all of their needs have been met. And they should hopefully be able to cope better with that isolation of the kennel environment. And then we pin the point of the triangle with some sort of self-soothing enrichment. So that's the best place to time that enrichment, is at the end of those activities, whether that's a frozen food stuffed Kong, or we just take an empty paper towel roll and shove peanut butter and kibble in it that's frozen, and we pop it in there. We don't have that handy. Maybe it's just a treat scatter or a kibble scatter. So they just go on this little scavenger hunt, and they can say, hey, now I'm in my kennel, you go do what you need to do. And all of my needs are met. And the thing about doing it in that predictable order is that the dogs start to learn that, okay, we did our walking. Now it's time to work my brain. Okay, I'm in focus mode and I'm in a better state for training. And then we get our one-on-one time. And now they're like, as they're getting up to leave, rather than going, oh no, panic, I'm going to be alone. It's, and now I get the goodie. Right. And so it becomes predictable to them. And I talk to a lot of shelters, say, well, I don't even have time. I can barely have time to walk the dogs. And I say, well, how much time do you have to walk that dog? Oh, maybe 5-10 minutes. Great. Then you take your first 3 minutes of physical exercise, 1 to 2 minutes of getting them to just do a few little tricks, training, skills, manners, and then sit with them for 1 minute, pet them, and then give them that enrichment. I would rather you hit all three, social, mental, and physical, than just did physical alone. Because often they're actually no better by getting, that 5-10 minute walk if we haven't hit those other areas as well.
As you're saying this, it's in our world, it makes common sense, but for a person who's out, never done this, or shelters, they do think over exercising, is the thing, but you do have so many of those dogs who come back overstimulated in the kennel after, if they haven't had that downtime. But what I was also thinking is this is such a beautiful model for dogs when they go to home, when they go to a home, because they've actually learned how to, come down from that excitement state too. So they're actually learning really good life skills, and if the people, in the mornings, if they walk them before they go to work, and then they, this is something that as a shelter could start developing for these dogs, in the shelter. The adopters can learn this skill, and it could, maybe it is only 5, 10, 15 minutes, but that dog then has something that's familiar from the shelter to this new home too. And I could see that this would be such a great way of helping that transition. Because another question that I have for you is, things that you tell the adopters, because when I work with shelters, the most disappointing thing is these dogs go to a new home and they last a day, a week, a month, and then they're back for whatever reason. Sometimes it's silly, like somebody returned a dog and happened to be at the shelter and it was this little cute Doberman. And I'm like, okay, so tell me so I can help them, fix these problems. Well, she's potty trained, she's this, she's this. And I'm like, so what exactly is the reason you're returning her? Because you're basically describing a perfect puppy.
Yep.
And they're like, we just don't have time. And they hadn't thought about how much time a dog, especially a young Doberman takes.
Right.
So in that case, it was like she was easy to rehome because she had all these skills. But then others, they push the dog and hug the dog who doesn't want to be hugged. They get bit the first day and those come home. What are things because I'm sure you have some skills. And again, we could talk about this for 5 days. So the highlights of what you would tell an adopter, because I love this, but this inverted triangle because we might have people who are listening from shelters, but we might have people who just adopted or are thinking of adopting, things they could do at home. Like what are some suggestions you give to when people adopt these dogs?
For sure. And then again, this started when I was in clinical practice and I was giving this advice to my clients, and where this actually the triangle is most beneficial is that coming home from work or school, and that's when we as humans are like, oh, this is my wind down time. And the dog who's maybe been crated or alone is like, now the day begins. And there is a disconnect there. And there's that then is the recipe for a lot of frustration. And frustration is going to breed a lot of displacement behaviors that are unwanted by the humans who are trying to settle and relax. So they start to bark at you or mouth you or steal your stuff and run away. So it gets you up to chase them. And then that starts the cycle of yelling and punishment and conflict. And it's a vicious cycle, as you know. And so it was like, hey, why don't we, before they start pestering you and asking for, why don't we just have a plan? It's just like children. So I have an 8 and 10-year-old daughters now, and like they start to like read the positive parenting, like, oh my gosh.
Right.
So you take your 10 minutes a day, you fill their pot, you provide oh, yep, this sounds familiar.
I have 3 that are teenagers now too. And I remember when Karen Pryor, I read her book for dog training, and I'm like, wait a minute, she wrote this for parenting. Don't Shoot the Dog was supposed to be a parenting book, it's crazy.
The needs before the problem behaviors begin, because the problem behaviors are usually a result of there's some lack of need that's not being fulfilled, unless there's true pathology, which I would see all the time. But even with those dogs, it was always helpful to make life as predictable as possible. And if we could do that before you think they're going to start pestering you, it's very helpful. And so my clients are like, oh yeah, okay, I did a triangle. Then we do a big triangle in the afternoon, meaning like it's 20 minutes of exercise and then 5 minutes of training and then 15 minutes of one-on-one cuddle time. And you can multitask, like you can be doing notes on your computer, or you can be studying, want that one-on-one time, and then say, all right, now mom is going to make dinner and relax and have her wine while you chew on this Kong for the next 20 minutes. So it's very helpful there. And some dogs require multiple ones. I've also found this, which I think is interesting, to be helpful for dogs that may be grieving the loss of another pet, and they're just depressed and looking for some like there's just no hope in their day. And people say, what do I do? How do I snap them out of it? And I say, hey, it's normal, for some level of grief, but it seems to be prolonged. Then having these triangles gives them sort of predictable routines and something to look forward to know what we did a walk. Oh, well, now we're going to do this thing with these really yummy treats, and then I'm going to get my one-on-one time, and then I can look forward to that, whatever form of enrichment works best for that dog, that they can engage with it and enjoy it. And so it sort of adds some highlights to their day that then becomes predictable, and then they have them wake up kind of with something to look forward to. And I found that's helpful for them as well. And so, yeah, it's actually a good idea. We should print out, because I have a nice graphic. I should print that off and give it to our adopters. Although I feel like I've already overwhelmed them so much. I'm like, well, you need socialization and house training and, manners. I think the biggest advice to give to our adopters is be patient. Like, these dogs have been through a lot. And the dog you see the first hour you would get home is probably not the dog that you're going to have. And that can go both ways. They seem really calm and docile, and as they get comfortable, you're going to see the energy and the spunk come out. But some of the ones that are just losing their mind with displacement behaviors, jumping, mouthing, seem like out of control, They just need to decompress for a little while, and give it time. So, unless there's clearly something dangerous or unsafe with a child or another pet, that's a different story. Don't wait if your dog is biting your child or, stalking and hunting your cat. That's a call return. Like, please, we encourage you to return in that situation. That's not safe. But if it's more like, wow, this just seems like more than I can handle, this seems like a lot, have a little patience and seek help. Start to find those resources for reading materials or online materials. So we have a great website called Puppy Passports. So puppypassports.com, or you can go to GiGi's.org and find it. It's free information, hits all the buttons for puppy advice and adolescence. So adolescence is those are our most challenging dogs to adopt out because they have teenage brains, right? Where they have lots of big emotions, but the brain isn't really helping them know what to do with all of them. So they're impulsive, they get easily frustrated, and they, manifest those behaviors through ways that tend to annoy people quite a bit. And so having that understanding is also, again, that patience and understanding that transition period is going to be hard. And that taking in a rescue dog is something, we want to accept and prepare for. And it isn't for everyone. And that's okay. We have what we call a judgment-free return policy at GiGi's. For the first 90 days. If it just doesn't work for you for whatever reason, that's okay. We'd so much rather take that dog back into our care than have it be in a situation where both the people and the dog are unhappy. And sometimes it's really just a mismatch. As the science tells us, we can't predict how a dog's going to behave in a home based on how they behave in a shelter. And so sometimes it can really change. And it really is maybe more than that home can handle. But we might have a dog that is a much better fit for them. And so we
that
really
mismatch is huge. I talk to people a lot, you pick this dog. A lot of times people pick a dog just out of their looks or, how they appear. And that's kind of like dating online. Like, like you're going on a date because this person is attractive to you, but that doesn't mean the first date means that you are going to marry them. Like there's, as someone who's done online dating, it is terrible. Like you don't know who you're really getting, and if you were forced to like stay with that mismatch, it'd be awful. And that's kind of what, obviously in a shelter, you get to meet them a little bit more, but like you said, sometimes it can take up to 3 months to really see or more who you're going to get. And if that trend is going if you're like, instead of getting closer, you're going opposite directions, it's just like any other relationship. Like, okay, this relationship's not going to work. You and I've met people where I meet them the first time, I think, oh, this person's great. And I spend a little time with them and I'm like, I don't know if this would be a good friend fit for me. Maybe they're just an acquaintance now, or I don't have anything in common with them after I've got to know them. So that's such a great thing that people need to know. There shouldn't be judgment, but you also need patience. So, you don't want to say, oh, this puppy is jumping on me, so they have to go back because they're, dominating me. No, they are just puppies and they don't know anything different. But maybe you're not equipped to handle a puppy because you're, elderly or you're sick or you're busy or something. So, I think that's such a great thing for people to understand, that they're not failing if that's a wrong match, too.
And looking out for resources for help, because I think you have an in-between there where people are maybe unsure, this feels overwhelming, and before the bond is broken, to seek help. And so we have our adopters fill out surveys, 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, so that if we are seeing signs that things are going awry, we can intervene. And often it's just support. We provide training in person, in home, and also virtually. So if someone has moved cross state, they can still connect with our trainers virtually and get the help that they need. And sometimes it's just about understanding the behavior they're seeing and maybe just making a few changes here. Now, sometimes it's much bigger. It's a pathology. It's going to need a lot more work, and they have to decide if they're in it for the long haul. And some people are, and some people are not. And those who are not, we're not going to judge you. It's hard having, as you and I know, right? Took a step in career path, but we've got some trauma memories there for
for sure. Yeah, I have. Flat coats are beautiful, but I now see a flat coat and I do get a little like, okay, they're not all, just because that was Sadie. I am forever grateful for her because I found this path. And I think a lot of, in our world, these dogs do teach us so much, but it is a little trauma too, that we experience after going through it. And not everybody's as stubborn as us to be like, we are going to find a way, which our stubbornness gets us where we wanted to be. But not everybody wants to be a behaviorist. Like that's just not
No. And
how
not
it is.
everyone is in a place like right now. Like I have 2 children. I couldn't have had that dog I had. He wouldn't have
Exactly.
been safe around them. I mean, children are kids, and as much as you try to manage, management will fail at some point. He wouldn't have been safe for me to have, but it's all about kind of your life point and story. And again, we just try not to judge. Ask for patience, understanding, and we will support you as long as you're still in it. And
Right.
if you're not, and that's okay.
Totally. So I have another question for you because I'm super excited about this. And I don't remember the launch date now off the top of my head because I didn't write it down, but you have a new book coming out, The
The launch
Introduction of Animal.
date is
Oh, there it is. The
surprise.
Introduction of Animal Behavior and Veterinary Behavior Medicine. So
Yeah.
how did you get started with this? And tell us a little about the book.
Yeah, so my time at Ohio State was there just a little over a decade, and I had the privilege of teaching first-year veterinary students about animal behavior. And we had lots of textbooks, okay, a little bit from this, a little bit from that, because it's a multi-species course, but never one to just go along with what I was teaching. Like, all right, now chapter 2 today, chapter 4 tomorrow. And so trying to tell students, well, there's 10 textbooks that we're gonna, pull from. They're not going to buy all 10, and I would never ask them to. So it was difficulty. So I always thought someday I'm going to have a textbook that can go along with this coursework. And even though I've left academia and only I'm an adjunct at Ohio State now, and so do a little bit of teaching in some of their handling labs and work with some of their senior students. I now also teach the intro course at University of Florida. I go down to Grand Cayman and teach at St. Matthew's University, down to Lincoln Memorial University. So I'm very passionate about getting behavior into veterinary curriculums. And so anytime those opportunities arise, I will take advantage of them. And so when the pandemic hit, I had just moved over to GiGi's and thought, well, I have all this time. Why not do it now? So 4 years later, I mean, really, this is a passion project. It was labor intensive, and I have over 20 collaborators to thank for their contributions, all coming together to make what I feel is a very cohesive, comprehensive introduction. It's intended to be an introduction book. It's not necessarily a clinical companion for those seeing high-level complicated behavior cases. It's designed for veterinary students who are learning, or recent graduates that are starting to see behavior cases and thinking, oof, I need that foundation. It's not just how I treat. But as you know, when you have a case, you don't need to just know, all right, what do I reach for? But why did this behavior happen? How do I read the animal's body language? How, what sort of underlying medical conditions might be contributing to this? So you need that foundation before you even get to the clinical part. So yeah, so it's out early. So it's ready for the fall semester, and you can order it now on Wiley. So the publisher is Wiley, so wiley.com. It's also available on Amazon and other major retailers in both electronic format, and then here's the hard copy full of pictures.
I'm going to order mine right after this because I didn't think it was launched yet.
It happened fast. So
I got some early email. I don't know, after we had already planned to talk and I saw it was coming, and I was like, oh, we have to talk about that because I'm really excited. And books are labor intensive and they're hard, but I think that this is something that's really important. As someone who has, as a technician, had since the 90s, like Karen Overall's book was the only one that was available when I very first started. And I love her, but it's a very techie book. So, I loved it. I didn't interpret it to
exactly.
Yes.
You need some,
like I would have the general vets I worked for, and they'd be like, Shannon, I don't even understand what this resting protocol thing is. Like, can you, and I just kind of footnoted it for them. So I'm really excited for something that is at that entry level, because they can't get to the clinical stuff until they actually have understanding of body language and what could be going on. So I think that is another great thing that general vets could do, or if they're just interested first year. I think even I'm going to be doing some adjunct stuff with the vet tech school locally, and I'll bring my copy and just kind of see if I, because it's something that technicians need to be aware of.
Oh, I think it's good. I think so. There's 2 parts. The first part is really that foundation that could apply to any animal professionals, shelter, technician, assistants, trainers, anyone looking for starting out trainers, right? Looking for foundation. And the second part is more clinical, but I think our veterinary technicians are right there in the trenches, if not more in the trenches with those clients with those behavior cases. So having a thorough understanding of what are the diagnoses, what's the treatment, overall treatment plans. There's 2 chapters on psychopharmacology. So it does dive into that clinical kind of the starting point, right? So that you have a nice foundation to jump off of. Okay, now I know, now I can get into more species specific, more advanced, protocols for treatment, but it's pretty solid for, again, veterinarians. I mean, there's so many vets that didn't have a behavior class. Like I didn't have one. Like so many of us didn't have that, and it's still going on now. And so to at least have this resource for that to share, and it's been a dream, definitely a passion project, and 4 years.
Exactly.
I can read books to my kids now if they still want me, but
Right. Oh my gosh. Oh, this has been so amazing. Dr. Herron, thank you so much for being here. But is there anything that you'd really like to just have people know, whether it's with shelter dogs or behavior, or, and behavior, or just being, I mean, patience, obviously, but is there anything else you'd like to share as we close?
I mean, I think we'd all love if, everybody did their homework, did some research about what kind of dog would be the best fit for them, whether it's, a puppy versus an adult, small versus large, certain, working breeds versus, other breeds that maybe are fit for a, more sedentary lifestyle. We tend to choose often for looks rather than personality, but it's the personality. It's just like getting married. It's the personality. It's going to let that bond last. Not just those the attraction gets you there, but to let that marriage last long term, to keep that human animal bond strong for the duration of that animal's life, it's really about the lifestyle fit and that personality. And so when I talk to people, I love doing matchmaking. We talk about, okay, what things are you looking for? It's interesting. Often I want a dog that's potty trained. I want him crate trained. And it's like, oh, okay. So let's talk about, so there's core personality and temperament, and then there's things that we train.
Yes.
Those are all things you describe to train. So I want to know more about, what are you looking for? Do you want a lot of energy, a lot of spunk? You want to go hiking? You want to go to breweries? You want a social dog? Or are you more a homebody and you prefer to kind of hang out and watch Netflix and eat popcorn, and want a dog that, hey, if you don't have time to take them on a 5-mile run today, that's okay. They're not going to tear up your house. They're going to sit on the couch with you, and that's okay. And so looks are not going to determine that type of fit. And so, I mean, in breed, again, our dogs here all months, so it only gets you so far. But asking questions, finding dogs that have been in foster care, or asking questions of the staff about the personality. And, with our shelter, we really encourage our adopters to trust the process. Tell us about your lifestyle. Tell us what you're looking for. We know these dogs' personalities. I know you can look on our website and see how cute they are, but I can tell you this one that may not have the best looks actually probably fits your lifestyle really well from what we know. Again, and that's not always predictable, but the longer we get to know a dog, particularly if they've been in foster, we have that feedback to know. And so, and if for people who aren't sure, I'm not if I'm ready for a dog, or I think I want this cute puppy, but puppies are a pain in the butt, right? So do I know that? I really encourage people to foster, find an organization and foster, and see if it's right for you. That way, a dog is benefiting from time out of the shelter. It's no harm to you or the dog if you say, hey, that was fun, but I don't think I'm ready for that full time. Or maybe people that travel, like have jobs that are traveling. Well, when you're home, you can foster, do that favor to that shelter or that rescue and that animal. And then you don't have to worry about finding a pet sitter.
Right.
Just start fostering again. So that was more than a short tidbit.
That's okay. I think it was really important. It is very important, because that matchmaking is such an important part. Because that's, for me personally, with the clients I see, usually, not every time, but there is a lot of times where I'm like, okay, you're a couch potato and you got a border collie that, and like, okay, how can we make this, either are you willing to try to make this work, which means you're going to have to change a little bit because, so that we can make this work, or is this just not the right fit? So I think that's a great way for things to remind people to do. So thank you so much for being a guest here. I'm, like I said, I could talk to you forever, and I'm definitely going to have to put it on my plans to come out and see you guys out in Ohio, because I think GiGi's is doing great things. And thank you for being here. Thank you everybody for listening. I hope that this, podcast really helps people see, especially shelter medicine, but it's really bringing any new dog into a home. There's a lot of good tidbits here. So I really appreciate it. And Thank you so much for being here, and we'll sign off and we'll see everybody in our next podcast.
Thank you, Shannon.